I want to talk about the threat that the Republican Party poses to democracy. It's been kind of a common theme on the show lately, but they pose a threat to democracy in a multitude of ways. Some of them just outright reject the results of the 2020 election. Some of them are explicitly anti-democracy. Mike Flynn, Trump's national security director, actually said that there's no reason why we couldn't have a Myanmar-style military coup here in the United States. If Trump gets a second term, who knows what he'll do? He's already detailing his radical plan to purge civil servants from government in order to install Trump loyalists. Now, this is the hallmark of authoritarianism because dictators, once they seize power, that's the first thing that they do. And Supreme Court justices who are supposed to be apolitical pose perhaps the greatest clear and present threat to democracy with the case of Moore v. Harper, where they will possibly allow, using independent state legislature theory, states to subvert the will of their voters. But there is a new way that the Republican Party wants to subvert democracy, and that is by rewriting the United States Constitution. You heard that right. Now, it's a gigantic task, and the odds of them succeeding here are slim. Having said that, though, not 0%. And the momentum that they're gaining to rewrite the Constitution is something that everyone should seriously pay attention to. Now, let's talk about a December 2021 conference by ALEC. So Alex Koch wrote about this in the Center for Media and Democracy, detailing the GOP's plan at this particular ALEC conference to call for a constitutional convention. Now, there's a couple of different ways that you can amend the Constitution. It can be done by Congress, or you can have the states call for an Article 5 convention. Now, the former way is the way that we've added amendments to the Constitution historically, but an Article 5 convention has never been done before. So what is an Article 5 convention? Well, if you get 34 states to pass resolutions calling for an Article 5 convention, then they can rewrite the Constitution. So that's essentially the route that the GOP is pursuing. Some members of the GOP is pursuing. Now, in order to get 34 states on board, you have to hold majorities in all of those states. And you need 38 states in total to ratify whatever amendment was come up with at this new, potential constitutional convention. So it's difficult. How would you do that? Well, at that December ALEC conference, Rick Santorum gave us a little bit of insight by hinting at extreme gerrymandering. He said rural voters, even though there are fewer of them, actually have an outsized granted power under this process. And we have the opportunity as a result of that to have a supermajority, even though we may not even be in an absolute majority when it comes to people who agree with us. But because of the way the concentration of votes has changed in this country, we can actually accomplish things. Now, to be clear, Rick Santorum was making the case for an Article 5 convention, using gerrymandering to secure majorities needed to get enough states to pass resolutions calling for an Article 5 convention. So the question is, why are we talking about this December conference? This is from last year, so what's new? Well, a lot has changed, and a lot in terms of the momentum that this movement has gotten, because that conference was essentially a flashpoint for the movement, but because of recent successes that conservatives have had, they've felt emboldened, and this movement has made a lot of really big gains. Insiders Grace Panetta and Brent Griffiths detail how this movement has gained quite a bit of momentum since that December 2021 conference in an article titled, "Republicans' Next Big Play is to, quote, scare the hell out of Washington by rewriting the Constitution, and they're willing to play the long game." So the question is, how many states have actually passed a resolution calling for an Article 5 convention? And you might wonder, it's got to be like 2 or 3, right? Because this is a fairly fringe movement. Well, as of December of 2021, the number was 15. 15. Now, what's the new count? Since the movement has gained momentum, what's the new tally? 19. 4 more states since December have passed resolutions calling for an Article 5 convention, meaning they are more than halfway towards their goal of getting 34 states to call for an Article 5 convention. They only need 15 more states. Now, again, you need 38 states to ratify whatever amendment that they come up with. But that is a considerable amount of momentum, a considerable amount of progress that they've made. So what's fueling them? Well, as Insider explains, the December 2021 ALEC meeting represents a flashpoint in a movement spearheaded by powerful conservative interests, some of whom are tied to Trump world and share many of Trump's goals to alter the nation's bedrock legal text since 1788. It's an effort that has largely taken place out of public view, but interviews with a dozen people involved in the Constitutional Convention movement, along with documents and audio recordings reviewed by Insider, reveal a sprawling, well-funded, at least partly by cryptocurrency, an impassioned campaign taking root across multiple states, notably fueling them success. During an extraordinary few weeks in June, the Supreme Court's 3 new Trump appointees powered the reversal of Roe v. Wade. They fortified gun rights and bolstered religious freedoms. Future presidents now have less power to confront the climate crisis. Each win is the product of a steady and, in some cases, decades-long quest by conservatives to bend the arc of history rightward. This isn't an exercise either. State lawmakers are invited to huddle in Denver starting on Sunday to learn more about the inner workings of a possible constitutional convention at Academy of States 3.0, the third installment of a boot camp preparing state lawmakers in anticipation of an imminent Article 5 convention. Rob Nadelson, a constitutional scholar and senior fellow at the Independence Institute who closely studies Article 5 of the Constitution, predicted to Insider there's a 50% chance that the United States will witness a constitutional convention in the next 5 years. Whether it happens, he said, is highly dependent on Republican success winning state legislatures during the 2022 midterm elections. So let's just pause here. What's fueling their success is success, right? Because they saw how much was accomplished during this last session with the Supreme Court. What was formerly viewed as impossible was achievable. Now they thought, well, if we can overturn Roe v. Wade, essentially introduce prayer in schools, not in the classrooms, but at least legalize it in some ways. If we could do all of this within the span of 1 year, what else is possible? We can rewrite the entire Constitution if we play our cards right and if we're committed to the long game. So because they were successful, conservatives have been emboldened, and to show how emboldened they are, well, 4 more states are signing on to this process. Now, what exactly do they want to change about the Constitution? Well, right now, they're limiting the scope of what they want to change. So first of all, they want term limits. Now, some people would agree with that, right? I agree with term limits, but I don't think that doing this constitutionally is the way it should be done, because term limits, when introduced in some Latin American countries, has led to actually increased corruption. So if it's done legislatively, if it's a disaster somehow, then you can reverse it. But if it's constitutionally ratified, then you can't. If you don't like it, if we don't like the result, we can't reverse that. So that's like the least gripe or the least problematic thing about this. What they want to do, which would be disastrous, is they want a constitutional amendment for a balanced budget, essentially permanent PAYGO, which means that nothing that the left wants could ever be possible. Medicare for all, climate change, mitigate, like nothing could be possible because you can't pass any legislation unless there's a pay for. And so right there, so much is off the table. But the most vague and worrisome segment is them trying to limit the power and jurisdiction of the federal government. They're not really saying how. They're using term limits, I think, kind of as a Trojan horse to create this veneer of populism, because a lot of people are dissatisfied with members of Congress and they support term limits. But it's more than just those 3 goals. As Insider continues, what's new now is the ever-evolving power coupling of a corporation-backed ideological juggernaut led by ALEC, a nonprofit organization with close ties to large tobacco and drug companies, and a determined Republican Party increasingly dominating many of the nation's 50 state houses. If they were successful, a constitutional convention led by conservatives could trigger sweeping changes to the Constitution. Their goals include gutting federal environmental standards, nixing nationwide education requirements, and creating an incredibly high threshold for Washington, D.C., or a territory to earn statehood. Some would like to make it difficult, if not impossible, for someone, National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases Director Anthony Fauci, for example, to work for decades within the federal government. Constitutional Convention boosters include many of Trump's current and former allies, including conservative legal scholar John Eastman, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, and Fox News personality personalities like Sean Hannity and Mark Levin. Eastman, who recently had his phone seized by federal agents investigating Trump's attempts to overturn the 2020 presidential election results, attended a 2016 mock convention hosted by the Convention of States. 6 years later, the Academy of States 3.0, taking place Sunday ahead of the National Conference of State Legislatures 2022 summit in Denver. On its website, the group boldly forecasts that a new constitutional convention could take place in 24 months and quotes former President Barack Obama in emphasizing, "You can't change Washington from the inside. It's a heavy lift, but it's not out of reach." Arne Pearson, the Center for Media and Democracy's executive director and a close watcher of the convention movement, told Insider, "I think it's a real threat." Yeah, and I think that it's a real threat as well. Not as big of an immediate threat as Moore v. Harper or Trump getting a second term, but nonetheless, this is something that we need to pay attention to. Now, one thing that is working in our favor is not just the 38 state requirement to ratify whatever they come up with in the event 34 Republican-led states call for a resolution for an Article 5 convention, but it's also the fact that a lot of conservatives, including Trump Republicans like Andy Biggs, are explicitly against a constitutional convention. In fact, in 2012, the RNC passed a resolution saying that they condemn constitutional conventions. And part of that might have been because they were afraid by a different Article 5 convention threat, and that is Wolfpack. So for those of you who follow the Young Turks, Cenk Uygur had a movement to call for an Article 5 convention to get money out of politics. And there were several blue states that passed these resolutions, although some states have went backwards and rescinded their resolutions because they don't like this prospect of a potential runaway convention where you call a convention for something small and the scope increases, and then you could open the door to a bunch of terrible things. Now, I think that because there's this 38 state need to, or requirement rather, to ratify this amendment, I'm not necessarily worried about a runaway amendment, but whatever conservatives want to do in any way that they specifically want to rewrite the Constitution or add amendments, that horrifies me because these people are authoritarian and they don't care about freedom. They don't care about Americans. They just want to impose their minoritarian views on all of us. But I think a lot of Republicans backed away from an Article 5 convention after, getting money out of politics gained momentum. So now it seems to be switching. Momentum for Wolfpack has kind of died down as far as I know, but momentum in this opposite direction has certainly sped up. Now, the question is, who's funding this? Because the article mentioned this is a well-funded movement. So who's funding this? Well, they state tax filings obtained by the Center for Media and Democracy reveal the groups, which are not required to disclose their donors, have received millions from Koch-connected Donors Trust, the Mercer family, and groups linked to powerful conservative lawyer Leonard Leo. A 2020 internal audit of Convention of States obtained by the group revealed that a $1.3 million donation made in Bitcoin made up 16% of the group's budget in 2019. Two donations totaling $2.5 million accounted for 36% of the group's 2020 budget. So you have some really wealthy, powerful people behind this. So this is worrying, and it's something that we should know about because this has largely been a covert movement. A lot of us have not heard about this. So again, I just want to reiterate that in the near future, whether or not this will be successful, they're saying they can get a constitutional convention within 24 months. Experts are saying 50-50 chance within the next 5 years. I think that the biggest clear and present danger to democracy without question is the Supreme Court with Moore v. Harper. That is something where, if they're able to legitimize independent state legislature theory, they don't even need a constitutional convention because they'll stay in power in perpetuity. And we'll see minority rule for the foreseeable future. So, it's something that we definitely need to keep on our radar. Don't freak out about this too much right now, but just be aware of what's happening. There is a growing movement of conservatives, a once fringe movement, mind you, of conservatives that want to rewrite the Constitution, add amendments, change it up a little bit. And that momentum has considerably, shifted in their direction. And that's something that we all need to pay attention to because in the event they were successful with this movement, it would be a disaster. And sure, it seems impossible, but a lot of things seemed impossible, like the repeal of Roe v. Wade, like an insurrection attempt in the United States. So they're emboldened and they're not going to stop at total abortion bans. They're not going to stop at Moore v. Harper. They want it all. They want everything. They want all the power. And this is just another way that they can secure power forever and kill American democracy. So don't freak out about it, but definitely do pay attention to this.
Do yourself a favor and click the join button on YouTube to become a member. Because Mike's doing a great job getting to watch his videos before everyone else is tremendous. Many people are saying this. Join today, folks. You won't regret it.